You open this door with the key of reason. Beyond it is another dimension, a dimension of truth, a dimension of freedom, a dimension of joy. You're moving into the land of both the ideal and the real, of the possible and the actual. You've just crossed over into the Capitalist Corner.
Where reason meets reality, welcome to the Capitalist Corner.
Welcome to the Capitalist Corner, everybody. I am all by myself today, and hopefully we'll have a fun episode. We've got a lot to talk about, but I just want to remind you I have a great interview out right now with Sheldon Richman on the article that we discussed the other day. It's out right now on the Rational Egoist podcast, and also don't forget today at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, Persephone and I will be doing Everyday Ethics on this channel, and also we started our podcast on crime, corrections, and culture yesterday. If you missed the first episode, it's on the Capitalist Corner channel now. So there are some things in the title that I wanted to talk about, but first, something annoyed me this morning, as often happens. Robert Nacer says, is it Taco Tuesday? I am inclined to say yes, it is. But my question is more, or what aggravated me is more this. So Donald Trump puts out on Truth Social, a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will. However, now that we have complete and total regime change, where different, smarter, and less radicalized minds prevail, maybe something revolutionarily, what doesn't make sense, wonderful can happen. Revolutionarily wonderful, maybe it does. Who knows? That's what he says next, and I agree. Who knows? We will find out tonight. One of the most important moments in the long and complex history of the world, 47 years of extortion, corruption, and death will finally end. God bless the great people of Iran. Now, Dinesh D'Souza posted this, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more on Everyday Ethics today, but I just wanted to touch on it a little bit here. A little frightening, but also exhilarating. Even if it were necessary, I wouldn't call it exhilarating, but nevertheless. He says, it is important to recognize the people of Iran, cowering under the tyranny of the mullahs for half a century, support this. It is that twisted, brutish civilization that is periled, not the great civilization of ancient Persia. Okay. So, first of all, Trump did not say what Dinesh is talking about. And if he did say it, it's a little strange that Trump would say, I don't want that to happen, because why wouldn't you want the regime civilization, the disgusting, barbaric religious stuff to go away? I don't know why you wouldn't want that. Trump says he doesn't. But also, how are you going to differentiate when you're bombing? And mind you, Trump has said he's going to bomb their civilian infrastructure. So how are you going to avoid hitting landmarks that are Persian and separate that from the Iranian civilization that he's talking about? And so I put a question today, and I said, listen, regardless of what you think about the war, and even regardless of whether you think that this is necessary, what Trump is talking about, does anybody really believe that the Iranian people want their civilization destroyed the way that Trump said? Not with Dinesh's cover-up. I'm talking about with what Trump said. Does anybody believe that? I mean, I don't understand how a mind does that. And I'm going to give a little hint to what we're going to talk about later on today on the Everyday Ethics. Because somebody actually said to me today, well, it depends. If what he means, I'll just read it to you. Let me go to my Facebook page and I'll read the comments. The guy says, if what Trump is referring to is the Islamic Republic's perverse idea of civilization, then based on my conversations with the Persians I know in the United States, the answer is yes, this is what they want. Okay. This is what happens Once you start to defend Donald Trump and what he does, this is what occurs. Nothing in Donald Trump's statement indicates that he only is referring to the anti-civilization represented by the regime. And you cannot base what is going to happen to the people actually being bombed and judge that based on what the Persians in the United States are telling you about this. But once you start defending Trump, that's what happens. For anybody who's wondering how the people that you used to know and respect as reasonable people have ended up supporting Trump in his positions on ICE, here's a hint. This is how it starts. You start with something that you support, the war with Iran. Okay. But then Trump is back and forth, and you're like, well, and if you start defending him, you are on a slippery slope to epistemological chaos and disassociation from reality. This is how it begins. So for anybody wondering, if you are going to defend this statement from Dinesh D'Souza and Trump and say, yes, the Iranian people want their civilization destroyed, as if that's what they anticipated when Trump told them help is on the way, if you're going to defend that, if you're going to do mental gymnastics to come up with new justifications and say, well, maybe he didn't mean that, he meant this. That's how it happens. That's how people get there. And if it happens to you and other people start calling you out about it, you're going to then be the people that you've been criticizing for however long it's been for supporting Trump. Okay. So I wanted to touch on that because it was on my mind, but I do want to get into Zohran Mamdani, the mayor there of New York City. He's got a new policy out. I want to make sure that I have it right when I look at it. The true cost of living. It's the citywide racial equity plan that he has, that Mamdani has. So I wanted to, before we get into that, I want to talk, just a little bit of who Mamdani is. I think that's important. So I got a little mini biography. I'm not going to go into too much depth. I just think it's important that we know. He was born on October 18th, 1991. He was born in Uganda. His parents are well-off people. He was a New York State Assembly member. He represented Queens. He moved to New York City at age 7. He graduated from Bronx High School of Science and Bowdoin College. He has a degree in African Studies. How having a degree in African Studies prepares one to be mayor of New York City, I don't know. He's participated in a hunger strike. He's very pro-Palestinian. And he, of course, is an avowed socialist who says that he will not be deterred from his socialism. So the goals of this, okay, so first of all, he did this, the reason that we're going to do this now is because of something called the True Cost of Living Report, which, it factors a bunch of different things in. It says here, the True Cost of Living Companion Report, released alongside the Equity Plan, the inaugural True Cost of Living measure, found that 62% of New Yorkers, about 5.4 million people, fall short of what families need to cover housing, food, healthcare, childcare, transportation, taxes, savings, and other essentials. And Hispanic New Yorkers had the highest shortfall rate at 78%, followed by Black New Yorkers at 66%. Asian and Pacific Islander New Yorkers at 63% and white New Yorkers at 44%. So when you see this, if you are a race hustler, if you are a believer that government is the solver of all things and believe racism is the cause of all problems, then you are going to be for this type of stuff. It says here, the preliminary citywide racial equity plan marks the first time any New York City administration has required major city agencies to examine their work through a racial equity lens and identify and eliminate disparities. So they are going to eliminate the disparities with the government programs. We'll get to that in a minute. The plan sets goals across 7 domains: children, youth, older adults and families, economy, housing and preservation, infrastructure and environment, health and well-being, community safety, rights and accountability, and good governance and inclusive decision-making. The report confronts the city's role in creating structural inequities. We end up with these systemic equities and all of that sort. The key goals are expand access to capital for underserved businesses. Who the hell is supposed to be serving businesses that they're underserved? I either patronize the business because I want their product or I don't. It's not my job to serve them. Connect New Yorkers in high unemployment communities to quality jobs and help young people build generational wealth. Apply a racial equity framework to all new housing proposals to ensure fair geographic investment that I guess is going to be done by the government. Ensure that every New Yorker has access to a primary care physician. And they're going to increase equity. They're going to reduce pollutants and, that stuff. So it got me thinking, well, wait a second here. Why do we need all these socialist programs in New York City? Because it seemed to me, as long as I've been paying attention, New York City heavily leans left, right? They're the big government, they're the equity, the big fancy liberal folks. And I'm thinking, well, what am I losing it? I didn't really think that. I'm being a bit hyperbolic, but nevertheless, so I did a little searching today, and you can see this. I think Persephone is going to post everything that I went through today, but it says that New York, this is Claude, New York City leans heavily toward the socialist left side. Rent control, rent stabilization have been in place since World War II and dramatically expanded in 1969. Direct price control regime that most economists across the spectrum consider a market distortion. The city runs one of the largest public housing systems in the Western world, housing roughly 400,000 people in government-owned units. New York City has among the highest tax burden of any city in the United States, with its own city income tax layered on top of state and federal taxes. It has repeatedly expanded its municipal workforce, social services, and welfare programs far beyond what most U.S. cities do. More recently, under de Blasio and Adams, the city pursued explicitly redistributionist rhetoric and policy, universal pre-K, fair fares, proposed employer mandates, etc., etc. And Grok essentially said the same thing. New York City and New York State rank among the highest in the U.S. for taxes per capita and as a share of income. Government spending per resident is very high, funding expensive welfare, Medicaid, education, and services. The city budget exceeds $100 billion with significant redistribution. Property tax system favors certain classes. Labor and regulations, strong union influence, minimum wage pushes, occupational licensing and business regulations, yada, 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 and fucking yada. So my question here is, if big government, if intrusive government, if socialism, if redistribution as policies are the answer, why are we in this place where the real cost of living is so out of whack with what people have? Why is the racial gap so large? And why do we need more government to get involved to fix it? And of course, it never crosses the minds of these people that maybe Ronald Reagan was right when he said government is the problem. It never crosses their mind that maybe it's the socialist light policies that we've been putting in place for 50 or so years, maybe longer, that are the cause of the problems we now see. No, they say, oh, look, we have a problem. I'm the government. I can fix it. I'm Zohran Mamdani. My parents are wealthy. I'm well educated. I'm smart enough to know how to fix everybody else's problems. And if I'll just micromanage enough, I'll take care of it. Now, I also was thinking about this morning, haven't we been doing this racial equity stuff for an awful long time? It seemed to me that we have, right? So I sent some stuff to Persephone about this very thing. So let me just find where I have Persephone on my phone. I don't have Persephone somewhere, like in a basement or something around here that I have to find her. But you never know. I mean, maybe. So, Mark Pellegrino is boarding. He's boarding a plane. I just got the text. Au revoir, whatever. French. I can't say it. Evidently, though, Mark has not seen fit to share this episode. Maybe he has, and maybe our numbers will be going up largely. That would be wonderful. But either way, so the Civil Rights era, we got the Civil Rights Act, 1964, banned segregation and employment discrimination, created enforcement bodies like the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, Voting Rights Act, 1965, targeted racial discrimination in voting, Fair Housing Act, 1968, prohibited racial discrimination in housing. Key innovation. Okay, he retweeted it. Thank you, Lee, and thank you, Mark. Affirmative action with Executive Order 10925, 1961, and expanded under Executive Order 11246, 1965, required federal contractors to take proactive steps to hire minorities, expanded to include women and other groups over time. From formal equality to active remediation of past discrimination was the core idea shift. Then we had the Great Society and the anti-poverty programs, War on Poverty, 1964, programs like Head Start, Job Corps, Food Assistance, Medicare, Medicaid, 1965, Elementary and Secondary Education Act, 1965, disproportionately benefited Black Americans. Expansion and institutionalization, 1970, Minority Business Enterprise programs, federal support for minority-owned businesses, school desegregation enforcement, busing policies to enforce integration, affirmative action expansion, expanded to universities, government agencies, private sector contractors. Now, there were dialing back of this stuff. I'm not going to say it's all been one way, but in education, it was refined. But then, of course, we ended up with the diversity, equity, inclusion stuff. Criminal justice reforms, because there's disparities in sentencing, so they're going to fix those as well. The point is there's been an awful long history of government involvement in trying to rectify these problems. So when you have federal government programs to fix the racial problems, and then especially in New York City, you have all these problems that are going to alleviate poverty, create fairness, and blah, blah, blah. Why then do we now need the new program from Mamdani? Why? Maybe, Mamdani, you should check your premises, because maybe, just maybe, you might be wrong. Will you ever challenge yourself? My guess is no. Because it's treated as a religion. And when your ideology or your belief system is a religion or treated as such, it's based on faith. It's not based on facts. It's not based on evidence. It's not based on logic. It's based on your feels. And Mamdani feels that socialism works, that socialism is the way. Or he's just an evil bastard who wants to hurt people. That could be it too. I mean, I ultimately don't know. I do know that socialism is a disaster. It's an unethical infringement of individual rights, and it's economically extremely. I can't even state it. It's just so inefficient. So that's the case with that. By the way, I forgot to mention, we are very much enjoy our. I maybe did mention it. Super chats and super stickers. Let me back up because I do think that we got one earlier. And I don't want to miss it. Yes, Jenna Kleem, thank you so much, Jenna, for the $2. Jenna may single-handedly be paying off my tax bill And that is, I'm very, very, very grateful for that, and I'm very grateful for all the I'll call them donations, I guess. I don't have a better word. So in from the American Economic Institute this morning, there was a really good article in the Daily Economy, and it talked about the redefining of the term inflation. Now, historically, inflation was defined as an increase of money and credit beyond production. And one of the symptoms was rising prices. Now, that has changed to rising prices being the definition, specifically consumption prices and not asset prices, are defined as inflation. And the guy that wrote this article, let me get his name. Oh, look at that, $2 from Jeanette. Thank you so much, Jeanette. Jeanette, 1979, and with a heart. And everybody loves a heart, or should. Yeah, everybody should love a heart. So anyways, he says, over the course, this is Matthew Blakely, and he says, over the course of the 20th century, the monetary definition favored by economists such as Mises and Hazlitt, unfortunately, Hazlitt was a journalist, not an economist, but we'll forgive that sin, was gradually replaced by a price-based definition. In 2012 paper, monetary economist Claudio Borio argued that the economics profession had forgotten lessons of the past and had neglected the financial drivers of business cycles, particularly the roles of credit creation and asset prices. And then the author of the article says, because the definition of inflation has shifted from increases in the money supply to changes in prices, policy prescriptions that allow for large increases in the supply of money and credit may not meet immediate public backlash if consumer prices remain relatively stable. Okay, so now we got to talk a little bit about what all this means. So first of all, if government wants to pay something with increased taxes, let's say that they don't increase the money supply at all. So the money supply is constant. If they want to raise taxes to pay for something, then you are going to have less money to spend on what you want. And people generally do not want less money to spend. So what they'll do is, they'll argue against raising taxes, of course. So the government figures, but if we print money, the insidious rises in prices, the people will still feel like they have the same amount of money. And maybe prices won't rise right away. So now the government is printing money. You feel like you have the same amount, so you can advocate for social programs to do this, that, and the other thing, whatever it may be, even if it's something necessary, because you're not immediately feeling it in your pocket the way you would with taxes. So what the author, he references something called the Cantillon effect. And the Cantillon effect, in essence, and I'm going to try to get Gene Epstein on the Rational Egoist to talk about Richard Cantillon. The Cantillon effect is that when money is put into the economy, when money is printed or credit is expanded, it doesn't go out evenly. So if you look up helicopter effect, Persephone, please look up helicopter effect for us. The helicopter effect, it basically says that if when money is injected into the economy, it's like a helicopter drops it from the sky and it all spreads throughout the economy evenly. Milton Friedman actually touted that for a time. I think he, strayed away from it a little bit toward the end. So the Cantillon effect says no. Richard Cantillon was an economist in the 18th century, by the way. Lee says she just sneezed really loud, but she gave us a pound, 1.99. So we're grateful for that. So the Cantillon effect says no, that money does not spread evenly. It actually benefits the first people that get it and then spreads throughout the economy. And think about it like this. So imagine if I were in charge of all the money and the audience were going to be the recipients. Let's say I have 10 billion and we live in a local economy. And I start off and I divide the 10 billion between Persephone, Jim Valiant, and let's say Lee. Well, prices are still the same. Prices haven't gone up at all yet, right? So Persephone, Jim, and Lee have all this fresh money at all the old prices. So they go out and start to buy. The first people that they buy from are starting to sell more goods, so they're wicked happy. They're like, my God, we're selling more stuff. This is great. But as they sell more stuff, their prices have to rise. So as the money spreads out, the later people get it, the higher the prices they have to pay. And some of them have to pay higher prices before they even get the money. Those people are unhappy. So there's some people that are benefited at the expense of others. So the reason the author of this article says that, one of the reasons that consumer prices shouldn't be considered is because consumer prices are often the last to rise. Why? Well, because consumers aren't generally the ones that get the money first. Banks are. Right? So if banks get the money, when banks give out loans, they're usually giving them to entrepreneurs, to investors, to developers. So the first prices to rise are likely to be asset prices, not consumer prices. But as a consumer, you're not seeing prices rise yet, so you're not going to complain about it. And meanwhile, the government is able to finance some of the other things it wants to finance because it's created more money. The problem is that this creates distortions in the market. It cannot last forever. Eventually, it's going to crash. And when it does, everybody suffers, but often people don't understand what has occurred. So there's numerous articles that I've included. This article, I included an article from Mises, some stuff from Claude, some other stuff, I don't remember what, but all very good stuff. It's very important to understand this, that traditionally inflation is an increase in the supply of money beyond what production justifies. This creates rising prices and distortions. The great Henry Hazlitt once said that people have taken to, instead of defining inflation, they're confusing one of its effects for the entire phenomenon. Persephone, I believe, is going to share the entire... she's going to share the helicopter money thing with today's recommended reading. Can you put it in the chat so I can read it? I just want to get it right before I move on. I want to make sure that I'm stating it correctly. And then we can move on to our next subject. And once I discuss that, Race Jacobson, thank you so much here for the thumbnail. Very nice of you. Okay, it seems Persephone has put it in the chat. Yes, Persephone, in the private chat. Let me go in here. All right. All right. The original metaphor. Imagine a helicopter flying over a town and dropping $1,000 in cash for citizens to pick up. Unlike a loan, it never has to be repaid. Unlike normal monetary policy, it goes directly to people rather than through the banking system. What it actually means in policy terms, direct money creation by a central bank that is distributed to the public or sometimes used for government spending without any expectation of it being withdrawn from the economy later. It's a permanent injection of money. How it differs from quantitative easing, QE involves a central bank buying assets, is technically reversible. Helicopter money is a one-way door. The money is created and spent with no corresponding liability or planned reversal. The theoretical effect boosts aggregate demand by putting money in the hands of consumers who will spend it without the credit channel friction of conventional monetary policy. Useful when interest rates are already near zero and quantitative easing isn't moving the needle. The risks, inflation or hyperinflation, if overdone, credibility damage to the central bank. Markets may lose confidence in the currency. Difficult to calibrate. Once the mechanism is normalized, political pressure to use it again is hard to resist potential currency depreciation. Persephone, find out exactly what Milton Friedman said and share that. That's really what I'm looking for. I won't read it again because I do want to jump sort of to the next topic that we have here. Oh, I forgot to put on Twitch. Well, I couldn't really do it again. I couldn't do that. I can't, like, I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing when it comes to this technology stuff. I'm going to put on Twitch so Persephone doesn't kill me because, well, Persephone likes to kill me, I think. All right, so there was another great article today about Adam Smith, who, while, he's not exactly my favorite economist, I do think that he said some good things. For a good critique of him, I'd recommend I, no, Akira Felix. It's relatively new, but Persephone's been printing out or been posting rather the reading list that I give her every day. That's been for quite some time. I don't know, maybe a week. Okay. Anyways, for a great critique of Adam Smith, watch my interview with Gene Epstein called "Adam Smith, the Drunken Uncle," because people say he's the father of capitalism. Gene says he's more of a drunken uncle. But anyway, so the author here, Nikolai G. Wenzel, also from the Daily Economy, he has 10 things from Adam Smith that he says are very, very good. The first thing has to do with the invisible hand. And he says, by directing that industry in such a manner as its produce may be of the greatest value, he intends only his own gain, and he is in this, as in many other cases, led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention. By pursuing his own interest, he frequently promotes that of the society more effectually than when he really intends to promote it. I have never known much good done by those who affected to trade for the public. Okay. So there are people that have issue with the framing of this, with the invisible hand that implies something's directing it. There's also, of course, the sort of the defense of capitalism because your actions are going to be benefiting others. It's not an individual rights argument. And those are sound critiques. But in my view, it's more effective to think of as the invisible hand as just a metaphor for the economic coordination that takes place under capitalism because of the information conveyed by prices. And no government can do that. No government, because government cannot figure out what needs to be produced. Only prices can when they're allowed to operate freely based on the supply and demand in the market, right? This sends information. We've talked about this a lot on the show. And these prices act as a coordinative mechanism that ultimately leads to, as they say, a growing tide raises all boats. It is true, that it's more of it argues for capitalism in sort of in an other-oriented way, and I agree with that. But it's still, I think, good to know that in a free economy, this coordination does take place. I think economic education is important. Okay. So number 2, people are not pawns. And the author says the flip side of the invisible hand involves social and economic engineering. Adam Smith was prescient in describing the psychology of social engineers, those self-proclaimed experts, i.e. Mamdani, I threw that in obviously, in their hubris that they can run an entire economy. And he says here, this is from Adam Smith, the man of system is apt to be very wise in his own conceit, and is often so enamored with the supposed beauty of his own ideal plan of government that he cannot suffer the smallest deviation from any part of it. Again, sounds like talking about Mamdani, and Trump for that matter. He goes on to establish it completely and in all its parts without any regard either to the great interest or to the strong prejudices which may oppose it. He seems to imagine that he can arrange the different members of a great society with as much ease as the hand arranges the different pieces upon a chessboard. He does not consider that the pieces upon the chessboard have no other principle of motion beside that which the hand impresses upon them, but that in the great chessboard of human society, every single piece has a principle of motion of its own, altogether different from that which the legislature might choose to impress upon it. Yes, we are human beings with our own values, our own desires, our own wants, and we can make our own choices. We do not need Zohran Mamdani or Donald Trump making these decisions for us, or any other government busybody who thinks he or she is capable of doing it. We are not pawns. We are human beings with a rational faculty and freedom of will to make our own decisions. The next thing he says here is collective action can't be imposed. And here it is. If those two principles coincide and act in the same direction, the game of human society will go on easily and harmoniously and is very likely to be happy and successful. If they are opposite or different, the game will go on miserably and the society must at all times in the highest degree of disorder. So if government is acting contrary to what the people actually want, is trying to impose things on them, It's going to be very, very bad. Markets coordinate effort, Adam Smith says. His key theoretical contribution is the division of labor. But this is not merely an economic model to be calculated with production charts by eager students of microeconomics. For Smith, it is something more, an instrument of cooperation to overcome the limitations of human beings. And Smith says, the division of labor from which so many advantages are derived is not originally the effect of any human wisdom. It is the necessary, though very slow and gradual consequence of a certain propensity in human nature, the propensity to truck, barter, and exchange one thing for another. Basically, so because I can't create everything I could possibly want on my own, it benefits me to focus on one thing and then be able to trade what I've produced for other things. Of course, money takes the place of the product, so we don't have a... No, it was James Madison. It's in Federalist, I believe, 51. Persephone, look that up. Federalist 51. I think it's at the beginning. So the point is that nobody can produce everything on his or her own. And the way that we get the things that we want is to produce things that other people want, and we make trades. Money is the great, of course, substitute. We put it in place of the things we produce so that everybody has a means of exchange and they don't have to go by the only thing that they can produce or what they produce. Self-interest actually helps everyone. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. Yes, I think that's true. The permissionless societies create prosperity. Yes, the more free a society is, the more prosperity it is likely to have. Cooperation connects us. Individual responsibility with limits. I didn't really like that one. I don't like this one either, so I'm going to skip right over it. The bottom line here, folks, if we take the invisible hand, right, the idea that human decisions that we make in a free society are ultimately coordinated so that we get the things that we want, we can pursue our own interest, and we can thrive. That's a free society. When you have policies like that of Zohran Mamdani that we talked about earlier, they interfere with these things. Rent control, for instance, it restricts the price mechanism, and thereby the way that it does it, it ultimately creates shortages. People refuse to build them, to build the houses and apartments. They refuse to rent them. More people want them because they're cheaper, and you have shortages. When you interfere with the minimum wage, what happens? You raise the minimum wage. The people who are hiring can't afford it. They're not going to take a loss, so they lay people off. You're pricing people out of the market when you do stuff like that. With inflation, when central planners believe that they can increase the money supply and therefore thereby create prosperity, they're wrong. All they can create is hell. Not literal, of course, but very bad consequences is what I mean by hell. Was it Federalist 51, Persephone? Was that right? Okay, good. I like to be right. I don't like to be wrong. I'm gonna actually, I have the Federalist Papers right here in front of me. So I'm going to find the exact quote for Mr. Felix. I always assumed Akira Felix is a guy. I hope I'm right. Because if not, I'm calling her a him, and I don't want to do that. Let me see. Okay, here it is. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place oblige it to control itself. A dependence on the people is, no doubt, the primary control on the government, but experience has taught mankind the necessary of auxiliary precautions. I wonder what those auxiliary precautions are that Mr. Madison is referring to. I happen to know it's this, the United States Constitution. What happens, though, when the auxiliary precautions no longer work and the restraint of the people no longer work? What do we get? We get Donald Trump, who can go to war on a whim, and some people cheer for it. So there you go. Yeah, they do. The supporters of Mamdani view themselves as Robin Hoods. You were no doubt correct about that. Let me click back onto Twitch. All right, I'm looking for questions now, folks. We've had a nice discussion. We've had four topics in essence. We discussed the Dinesh D'Souza saying the Iranian people want their civilization destroyed. We've discussed Mamdani's race-based policies for New York City. We've discussed the history of the definition of inflation and some of its negative consequences. And we've discussed the drunk uncle of economics, Adam Smith. Akira Felix says the Constitution is the closest thing we have to a sacred text. Indeed. I mean, it's our foundation as a country. It's not a Bible. It's a reality-oriented document that was meant to solve the very problem that Madison just alluded to. And if people think that is somehow unnecessary, well, I would like to know what they want in its place. It's not a matter of simply, Randy Barnett, who I disagree with on so many things nowadays, and it's very heartbreaking to me. But in his book, Restoring the Lost Constitution, he talked about a good indication, if you're being honest in your constitutional interpretation, is if you can see there's things in there with which you disagree. So if you're reading the Constitution and everything is just hunky-dory and you're like, yes, I agree with everything, you're probably misinterpreting it. That doesn't, however, mean that you toss it out, because it's supposed to restrain government, and by restraining government, protect our liberty, protect our rights. No questions from the audience. What Constitution. I would like some questions or at least some money. Can I have some money? I like money. Okay, I'm going to put Persephone up here and see if she has any comments or questions on today's show.
Mamdani said that he wanted to model New York after South Africa. You'd think that if he wanted to do that, he would look at how well the racial equity programs have worked in South Africa over the past couple of years. That was my thought, which I said in the comments, but
I didn't read them.
No.
All right, that's okay, because now you got to talk about them now, which is a good thing. So how have these programs worked out in South Africa?
Not well. So in South Africa, we've got what's called broad-based Black economic empowerment, which... So what it was supposed to do was even the playing field. What it's actually done is created a concentration of wealth in what's called the narrow Black elite. So it hasn't done anything for the majority of the people struggling in the country, but it has created a very, very narrow amount of politically well-connected individuals who are now raking in the money. It's allowed for huge corruption because basically state-owned companies and any companies who are sort of public, they have to meet a certain quota. But what that ended up doing is not empowering impoverished communities. It's just allowed them to basically install it's nepotism kind of. So it's done that. It's created massive brain drain, not just from white people leaving the country, but a lot of really skilled Black South Africans have left because they don't want to live in a society that is they don't want to get jobs based on the color of their skin. They want meritocracy, and it's not happening. And they fuck off because they're like, well, I didn't get this job because I was the most skilled. I got it because of the color of my skin, and they don't want that, so they leave. It's created skill gaps, skill mismatches, because the most competent person doesn't get the job. The the person of the right color gets the job. And sometimes that works out, but sometimes people are put in roles that they aren't actually competent to fill, and it creates problems. And that's big in the private sector, in public companies, but in government sector it is massively problematic because, in your in things like, Eskom, our power company, there's
Okay.
there's huge problems there because a lot of like the white engineers were let go, and we've now got less skilled people, and it's created problems. Akira asked, was it instituted by the same party that's been in power since the end of apartheid? Yes, because we've only had one government since the end of apartheid, and it is the ANC. And yes, it is a program that they instituted, and our president recently said that he won't reconsider whether it's a good idea, despite the well-documented negative effects that it's had on the country. Um, yeah, it's rife with corruption. It's created brain drain. It's created like more racism, weirdly. It's a policy designed to erase the effects of racism, but what it's done is create more racial tension in a country that is already pretty racially tense. And again,
Well,
it's done precious little to address the huge amounts of like extreme poverty in South Africa.
well done, Miss Persephone, and thank you, because you not only saved my bacon by giving us something to talk about for 2 minutes, but you also gave me time to look at a Facebook answer that I can now talk about.
Okay. Yay.
So does anybody remember the debate I had with Michael Nyren on the show? We debated whether constitutional originalism was akin to rationalism. Do you remember? You remember? Okay.
Unfortunately.
So I got a serious. I want to ask this as a question to you, Persephone, and to the audience. Okay, so pay attention, audience. Pay close attention. So I posted Dinesh D'Souza's comment that I told you about earlier about Trump's comment about destroying the Iranian civilization. And the question I asked, very specific, support the war or not? Put that aside. Does anyone believe the Iranian people want the complete destruction of their civilization? So here was Michael's answer. I got to scroll down now to find it. You mean like how Berlin in World War II was completely destroyed, or Gaza? Opposed to that also, I suppose, right? No, he says opposed to that also, I suppose, right? He's asking me if I'm opposed to that. What quote-unquote civilization here is worth preserving? Okay, my question here is, did he answer my question?
No.
So here's the thing people are getting upset because I'm criticizing objectivists lately. Because I posted that one of the biggest disappointments I've had since getting out of prison is the objectivists and libertarians who don't argue from reason. They treat ideas as if they're religious texts. They're dogmatic. They're rationalistic. They take any challenge to them. And somebody asked me, well, how do you know? The key is when somebody thinks that any disagreement with them has to be dishonest or it's dumb, that's a sign, right? So the question is, do these folks want their civilization destroyed? That's it. But he reads into it, you're disagreeing with me. Therefore, you must support X, 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 and X. So, Michael, if you're watching, I absolutely would have supported what was done in World War II, including, by the way, the declaration of war. Michael, the declaration of war that took place. In regard to what goes on in Gaza, not my country, not my leader. I did not vote for them or for it. But as an aside, I tend to support Israel. But neither one of them is relevant to whether the Iranian people want their civilization destroyed, which was the claim that Dinesh D'Souza made. Now, back to the original thing that I talked about at the beginning, when I talked about what happens once you go down this road to defending this. You can't answer a simple question that I put out there. You read stuff into other people's views and put them out there as if you're making an argument, right? The proper framing of the question, Michael, would be, did the people living in Berlin at the time want their civilization destroyed? Do the Gazans want their civilization destroyed? That's the question. Not do I support war. Why people, I don't get it. This guy is a professional lawyer, trained in argumentation, trained in rhetoric. He identifies as an objectivist, supposed to be the philosophy committed to reason. Does anybody think that that response is reasonable?
No.
To suggest that I wouldn't have supported war against Germany in World War II that was declared because I said the Iranian people don't want their civilization destroyed? How do you jump from that to that? It's Michael Nyron, Ian. I debated him on the show. How do you do that? And how does he think that's a rational response? Now, look, I do like to brag sometime. I brought him on this show and I utterly destroyed him in that debate. And anybody who's honest and watching knows it. You know who doesn't know it? Michael. You know who did not humble himself even a little bit from it? Michael. You know who's still on Facebook making ridiculous claims like the one there? Michael. Now, I'm told by some objectivists that I shouldn't care, that I shouldn't criticize objectivists. Really? I shouldn't?
Why?
I shouldn't criticize those who are in the same movement as I am? I shouldn't be upset that when I was getting out of prison, I couldn't look forward to anything more than joining rational communities, and instead I get that? I shouldn't criticize it? Come on. The thing I've committed myself to since I was 22 years old is intellectual honesty and intellectual consistency. When I see it's not operative, especially by people who are supposed to embody it, it annoys me.
So I have a question. Even if you hadn't been in prison looking forward to joining these rational discussions, isn't one of the main points is that we're supposed to judge everyone and everything?
Yes. Yeah, but what my
But
point
not
is...
but not objectivists.
No,
They're above judgment.
You're right. The problem is, though, for me, it hits especially hard. You have to understand, I was around the most irrational people there are for a quarter century. And I could not wait to be able to thrive, to be able to get into communities. I remember telling people who would say, yeah, people out there are irrational too. And I'd say, yes, but I could get into objectivist chat groups with objectivists. And instead, I've been called an obleftivist by the people who seem to worship Trump, who claim to be objectivists. And now the people who were calling them irrational a month ago and saying Trump was Hitler are telling me that because I'm criticizing Trump and his war, then somehow there's something wrong with me. But here's the problem. I actually am an individualist and I don't give a fuck. I'm just going to put it out there. When I say I don't give a fuck, what I mean is I will not alter my behavior because of the opinions of other people. Obviously, it irritates me. So to say I don't care is, not true. I do care. What I don't care enough to do is alter my behavior. Right? I'm telling the truth. My commitment is to reason. I would be willing to bet dollars to peanuts that if you submitted that to any AI system, my question, his answer, they'll say his answer was non-responsive.
Yeah, that feels obvious.
So there you have it. That's, where we are. So where are we to go? The people that are actually committed to reason, that actually believe in, as who said this earlier? I think it was Greg, existence, identity, and consciousness. He says, the holiest trinity ever concretized. Existence is identity, consciousness is identification. That is wonderful. That is wonderful. So, where do we go? Where can we go for reason? Well, I can tell you this. The best place to start is within your own mind. The supremacy of your own mind, your ability to interpret reality, and your commitment to doing so regardless of what other people think. Start with yourself and be committed to intellectual honesty, consistency, rationality. All right. We're going to go over and see what if people answer whatever the question was yesterday. I don't even remember what I asked, but we'll go and check it out. Oh, wow, 11 comments. All right, that's not a question. Oh, I asked about fact-checking the audience, if it bothered people. Fact-checking the audience is one of the best parts of the show. Sometimes you're the one getting fact-checked, like with the Super Bowl kid. Sometimes that was when Lee fact-checked me. Sometimes it's funny and brings memes along the way, like the guy calling you insufferable. That's a meme right there. He asked for people's opinions about movies. I never claimed fact-checking for serious topics was bad. This is a straw man. Why be hostile to your own audience? It wasn't hostile, dude. I wasn't hostile to the audience. And I didn't ask for their opinion. It wasn't an opinion question. It was a fact. Does the movie Mulholland Drive fit into the horror genre? That was the question. It was a fact-based question. And so when they gave answers, I fact-checked it. And had I been wrong, I would have quickly admitted it. Kira Felix says, it's not my audience. I have no affiliation with the show. My point is certain things taken out of context can become memes. Like saying Michael is insufferable because he paid taxes. It was a rhetorical question, obviously directed to Michael, or literally anyone with the show. I don't get how objectivists are confused about why they are struggling to gain influence when they make it incredibly difficult to build up a community, due either to indifference or hostility. It's been extremely disappointing to me. If I ever turn my back on objectivism, it will be because of other objectivists. I don't know, Guy. I don't claim to represent objectivism. I don't even claim to be an objectivist. That wasn't hostility toward the audience. I wasn't. It was more. It was a fun topic. On top of it, it wasn't even a serious topic. It was about movies. I mean,
Maybe you come off as hostile when people don't realize that you're joking. You do kind of have a bit of that deadpan vibe.
Right. So here's the question then. I'm going to ask the question before the capitalist corner. Should I alter the way that I communicate in order to grow the audience? That's my question. If so, how? Please go to YouTube and answer that question. Should I alter the way that I communicate in order to grow an audience? Please answer it. Capitalist thought of the day. Capitalist thought of the day is this. Many people for many centuries have thought that government was the answer. They thought that if their ideas were only implemented at the point of a gun, it would bring prosperity and peace. And they have been wrong. You cannot enforce peace at the point of a gun, not in the way that they mean it, not by telling people what they have to buy, whom they have to hire, how much they have to charge, and how much they have to pay for their employees. That is not the way toward a peaceful society. It is not the way toward a prosperous society. The true way to peace and prosperity is having a government that respects and protects individual rights, the individual rights that are derived from the fact that we are volitional beings who have to act to maintain ourselves. That's why we have rights. That's why they need to be defended. And as long as those are protected and those are secure, we have our best chance to flourish. So never give up fighting for individual rights. All right. Persephone will be back at 2:30 p.m. for Everyday Ethics. And not only that, but tomorrow we're going to be doing crime, corrections, culture again. Thank you, everybody, so much. Thank you for the super stickers. Thank you for joining. Thank you for your comments. Contrary to the belief of some, I'm not hostile towards you. I actually appreciate and love you very much. Until tomorrow, remember to check your premises. Peace.